I was sitting on the edge of my childhood bed, the same faded lilac sheets Grandma hand-stitched the year I turned 16. The old room still smelled the same, like lavender talc, and the faint sweetness of the cedar chest she kept by the window. My wedding dress hung on the closet door, soft white satin catching the warm glow of the bedside lamp. Everything looked peaceful, safe, exactly the kind of night a bride should have. But instead of excitement, a cold, twisting weight settled in my stomach. I couldn't stop hearing her voice. Not the gentle, humming voice she used when she stitched quilts or made tea. No, this was her serious voice. The voice she only used when she was warning me about something she didn't want to see me hurt by. Baby, don't marry into a family that hides things. Secrets rot love from the inside. I remember laughing when she said that. I was 20 at the time, fresh in love for the first time in my life with a boy named Thomas. Grandma didn't know him then, but she'd held my hand so tight that afternoon that the tips of my fingers had gone numb. I thought she was just being dramatic, protective. But now, standing on the edge of my own wedding day, her words echoed like a cold draft through the room. I rubbed my palms together, trying to shake off the unease. My mother peered in through the cracked door, her voice soft but tired. "You doing okay, sweet girl?" "Big day tomorrow," I nodded. "Just nerves, Mama." She smiled the way mothers smile when they don't quite believe you but don't want to push. She tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, kissed my forehead, and switched off the light. "Try to sleep. Tomorrow's a blessing." I lay back in bed, staring into the dim ceiling shadows. But sleep didn't come, because I'd learned something today. Something small, something that shouldn't have mattered. And yet, it had grabbed onto me with the same firm grip my grandmother once had. And I hadn't told anyone. Not Mama, not Thomas, not even myself, really. But as the darkness stretched deeper and the house quieted, my mind returned to the moment the unease began. A moment that happened in my soon-to-be mother-in-law's house. Before all the confusion, before the warnings I brushed aside, before the discoveries that made my skin crawl, life felt simple, soft, even. I had been with Thomas for 3 years, and we were by all appearances a strong couple. He had this gentle way of listening when I spoke, like my words had weight. And I loved that about him. His mother, Evelyn, was a different sort of woman, elegantly put together, always smelling faintly of rose water and starch. She spoke with the kind of politeness that felt rehearsed, but I told myself that's what older women did when they didn't know you yet. We didn't have a picture-perfect relationship, but there was no open hostility either. She was just distant. Watching, always watching. But because I loved her son, I tried to bridge the gap. I volunteered to help with wedding preparations, I visited her home often, and I praised her cooking, even when the taste reminded me of cardboard and salt. I told myself she'd warm up eventually. I told myself she was simply guarded, maybe lonely. I told myself a lot of things. On the outside, everything looked normal. I worked as a preschool teacher, spent my days wiping tiny noses and tying little shoelaces. The kids loved me, and I went home smelling like crayons and glue most afternoons. Thomas was an accountant, steady, soft-spoken, dependable. We lived in the same city my grandmother raised me in. Even after she passed, I kept her house exactly the way she left it, the checkered curtains, the chipped teapot on the stove, the crocheted blanket draped over the sofa like she'd be back any minute. Whenever life confused me, I found myself walking through that quiet house, letting her memories settle me. But nothing prepared me for the day I found myself alone in Evelyn's house, standing in her hallway, staring at something she clearly didn't want anyone to see. Even before that moment, though, there had been small things, tiny details that didn't feel like much at the time. A tone here, a glance there. The first time I visited her home, she stood in the doorway a full 5 seconds before inviting me in. She looked me up and down as if measuring something I couldn't see. "Thomas has told me about you," she'd said. But she didn't smile. Another time, when I brought over a basket of homemade biscuits, she accepted them, with fingertips only like she didn't want to touch the same air I breathed. She placed them on the counter without saying thank you, then immediately began wiping her hands with a linen napkin. But when Thomas walked into the room, she became a different one. Warm, soft, almost motherly. That contrast bothered me, but I pushed it aside. Love makes us rationalize things we would normally run from. Thomas and I were planning a small ceremony, simple, intimate, nothing grand. He wanted his mother involved, and I wanted him to feel supported. So when Evelyn invited me over 2 weeks before the wedding to go over final detail, I agreed, even though my stomach tightened every time I stepped into her house. Her home was cold. In that way well-decorated houses often are, matching. Everything placed perfectly, nothing touched by real life. Glass tables, spotless floors, candles that had never been burned. The kind of house that looked more like a showroom than a place where memories lived. She walked me through the living room, tapping her fingers against her arm like she was impatient. "I have something upstairs I want to show you," she said. "A little surprise for the wedding." I smiled, trying to ease the tension. "That's sweet of you." "It's nothing grand," she replied. "Just something personal." But she didn't look at me when she said it. I followed her up the stairs, noticing the faint creak in the second step, a sound that somehow seemed louder in her immaculate home. When we reached the landing, she turned right toward her bedroom. At the door, her phone rang. "I need to take this," she said quickly. Her tone sharpened in a way I'd never heard before. "Go ahead inside. The gift is in the wardrobe." She stepped away, whispering into the phone as she walked down the hall. I hesitated at her bedroom door. It felt wrong, too personal, but she'd told me to go in, so I did. The room was pristine, powder blue wallpaper. A neatly made bed with hospital-tight corners. A faint scent of rose water hung in the air. The wardrobe stood against the far wall, mahogany, tall, polished to a shine. I crossed the room, my footsteps barely making a sound on the thick rug. When I opened the wardrobe door, I expected a wrapped gift. Maybe a dress. Maybe a family heirloom. Something sentimental. But instead, I found something else. Something that made my throat tighten and my fingers go numb. Inside the wardrobe, taped neatly to the back wall, were photographs. Of me. Taken when I wasn't looking. Walking out of work, sitting in my car. Buying groceries. Standing outside my grandmother's house. Photo after photo, some zoomed in so close. I could see the small scar near my eyebrow I got when I was 9. They weren't new. They stretched back months. Maybe years. Behind me, I heard the faint creak of the floorboard, and then a voice, calm, cold, familiar. "What are you doing in there?" It was Evelyn. And she didn't sound surprised. She sounded caught. My hand was still on the wardrobe door, fingers trembling against the wood. For a moment, all I could hear was my own heartbeat, loud and uneven in my ears. Slowly, I turned to face her. Evelyn stood in the doorway, her phone still in her hand, but no longer against her ear. Her expression didn't match the situation, not the horror or embarrassment someone should feel when a person discovers a secret like this. Instead, she looked irritated, like I'd stepped on an expensive rug with muddy shoes. I didn't mean to. My voice cracked, and I swallowed hard. "You told me to. You said the gift was. That is not for you to see." Her voice was low, controlled, not a single note out of place. I stepped back, instinctively putting distance between myself and the photos behind me. I felt a cold shakiness in my limbs, the kind that comes right before panic truly sets in. "Why are there pictures of me?" I asked, though the question sat heavy in the air, unanswered for a long moment. Evelyn's eyes narrowed just a fraction, her lips pressed into a thin line. When she finally spoke, her tone was almost offended. "Close the door." She didn't answer, didn't deny, didn't explain, just close the door. I hesitated. Her hand twitched, and for a moment, something flashed across her face, something too quick to name, but sharp enough to make my breath hitch. I closed the wardrobe, not because she asked, but because my body seemed to understand something before my mind did. Something wasn't right. She stepped into the room, brushing past me, and shut the wardrobe with a soft click, as though sealing away a secret meant to stay buried. "Next time," she said, smoothing the front of her blouse, "wait where I tell you to wait." Her voice carried a quiet threat, not loud, not dramatic, but coiled, the way a snake curls in grass. I stared at her, searching for the smallest sign of remorse or embarrassment. But there was none. She looked perfectly composed, perfectly poised, as though nothing unusual had just occurred. "Evelyn," I whispered, "why were you taking pictures of me?" She paused near her vanity, picking up a small glass bottle of perfume and turning it slowly in her hand. Then she spoke lightly, almost bored. "A mother keeps an eye on the kind of woman her son plans to marry. That's not keeping an eye." My voice came out sharper than I intended. "That's spying." Her eyes flicked up to mine in the mirror. Something cold and amused flickered there. "Call it what you want." I felt my throat tighten. "Thomas doesn't know about this, does he?" She let out a soft, humorless laugh. "My son doesn't need to know everything." My heart dropped. A strange mix of fear and anger began spreading through me. Evelyn's words didn't just alarm me, they shifted something. They made me realize I hadn't been imagining her quiet resistance all these months. I hadn't imagined the way she watched me, evaluated me, judged me behind polite smiles. "What were you looking for?" I whispered. "What were you trying to find?" She put the bottle down slowly, with precision. Then she turned around fully. "You know," she said, her voice almost gentle, "your grandmother never liked to leave things to chance. She was always worried you'd end up trusting the wrong people." My breath caught. For a split second, the world tilted. How do you know anything about my grandmother?" Her smile was soft, controlled. "I make it my business to understand the people entering this family, including their influence." The room seemed to close in around me. The rosewater scent felt heavier, suffocating. "I think you should leave now," she said calmly. "Before we say something we might both regret." "Both?" I swallowed the bitterness rising up my throat. "I'll tell Thomas," I said quietly, but my voice shook. "You won't." Evelyn said it like a fact, not a threat, because you know what men do when they're forced to choose between the truth and comfort. She tilted her head slightly. "They choose comfort." I didn't say another word. I walked past her carefully, not turning my back to her until I reached the hallway. My hands were trembling so badly I had to grip the railing to steady myself. The stairs felt longer going down, and each step creaked just enough to make my skin crawl. Once outside, the cold air hit my face, and I breathed in deeply, trying to settle the mess inside me. But the moment I reached my car, my knees buckled, and I had to steady myself on the hood. Pictures, months' worth of photos, of me, taken without my knowledge, taken by the woman who would become my mother-in-law in 2 weeks. I sat in the driver's seat, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly the leather creaked under my palms. Tell Thomas, I thought. Of course I should tell him. Any fiancé would want to know their mother was stalking their future spouse. But then Evelyn's voice slithered through my memory. Men choose comfort? Would he? Would he brush it off? Would he say she just cared too much? Would he defend her? I hated the doubt creeping in. But I couldn't shake it. I tried calling him twice on the drive home, but he didn't answer. Maybe he was still at work. Maybe he was busy. But some quiet part of me whispered, what if he already knows? That night, I barely slept. And by morning, I had convinced myself I needed to let it go at least until I could find the right way to talk to Thomas. Weddings made people stressed. Maybe Evelyn was acting out of fear, or obsession, or loneliness. That's what I told myself, but deep down, my grandmother's voice echoed again. Baby, don't marry into a family that hides things. The warning wasn't supernatural, it wasn't mystical. It was simply a memory of her wisdom I had ignored for too long. And 2 days later, when I returned to Evelyn's house for what should have been a harmless visit, I found something that made those photos look almost innocent. Every instinct in my body told me to stay away from that house, from that woman. But weddings have a way of pulling you in all directions at once, tying you to people you don't necessarily choose. And Thomas, well, he insisted. She said she wants to apologize, he told me over the phone, his tone tired, like he'd been caught between us one time too many. She said she may have come off the wrong way. Can you please just come by? For me. And I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him everything. But something stopped me. The way he sounded frustrated, worn out, made me swallow my words. I didn't want him to think I was trying to create division. I didn't want to be the reason he felt torn. So I agreed. I'll go for a little while, I said. That's it. He exhaled with relief. Thank you. I'll meet you there after work. It wasn't until I was halfway to Evelyn's house that the unsettling realization hit me. She didn't call me herself. She had Thomas do it. The drive felt longer this time, like the city itself had grown unfamiliar roads and sharper turns. Clouds hung low, the kind of heavy gray that makes everything seem colder than it is. By the time I pulled into her driveway, my hands were already sweaty on the steering wheel. Her house looked even more immaculate than usual. Too clean, too still. I rang the doorbell, expecting to wait, maybe even hoping she wouldn't answer, but the door swung open almost instantly. Come in, she said, her voice even, almost polite. But polite in that way, cold water is refreshing, meant to shock, not comfort. She stepped back to let me in. I noticed she had dressed carefully, a soft cream blouse tucked neatly into charcoal slacks, pearl earrings, hair pinned in her usual flawless twist. She looked composed, but her eyes were tired. That surprised me. Thomas said you wanted to talk. I said cautiously. Yes. She clasped her hands in front of her. I believe we got off on the wrong foot. The phrasing was so controlled, so politically toned, that my stomach tightened again. I didn't mean to startle you, she continued. I realized the photos may have upset you. Upset was an understatement. A violation like that deserved stronger words. But Evelyn didn't use strong words. She used safe ones, measured ones. Why did you take them? I asked quietly. She looked away down the hallway, toward the kitchen anywhere but at me. I told you, a mother pays attention. That's not an answer. Her jaw tightened. No, she said, finally it isn't. Then she exhaled a long, slow breath. There are things about my past. Things about Thomas's past. You don't know. I just needed to be sure. Sure of what? My voice softened without my permission. Because for a moment, just a moment, she looked fragile. That you wouldn't hurt him, she said, not the way someone else did. I blinked. That wasn't what I expected. Evelyn, what are you talking about? She hesitated. Her posture, always straight and rigid, dipped just slightly. But then before she could answer, her phone buzzed from the kitchen counter. She flinched. Not lightly, not casually. A real, sharp jolt of tension. Before I could analyze it, she murmured, "Excuse me," and stepped quickly toward the sound. Left alone, I glanced toward the living room, my eyes tracing the same overly pristine decoration, the same untouched candles, the same framed photos arranged with sterile precision. One picture in particular drew my eye, Evelyn younger, holding a baby. She looked softer then, almost unrecognizable. Before I could look closer, she reappeared. Actually, she said, her voice too brisk, I need a moment to handle something. Can you wait in the sitting room? Her tone wasn't a request. It was a dismissal. But I nodded anyway. Sure. I headed toward the sitting room. But just as I passed the narrow hallway that led to the back of the house, I heard something. A sound that didn't belong in Evelyn's perfect world. A soft, muffled sob. A woman's sob. It came from behind a door halfway down the hall. The only closed door in the entire house besides the wardrobe upstairs. I froze. The sob came again, as time followed by a whispered, broken plea. Please, please just let me. Then silence. My skin prickled. Was someone in there? Against every instinct begging me to stay out of Evelyn's business, I stepped closer. Not to snoop, not out of curiosity, but because something in that voice sounded familiar, or maybe it was the desperation in it. I reached the door and pressed my ear gently against it. Nothing. No crying. No whispering. No movement. Just a deep, eerie stillness. I turned the knob without thinking, locked. Not surprising, but something about the solid resistance made my breath catch. I leaned down, closer to the seam of the door, trying to catch any sign of life on the other side. Footsteps. Behind me. Slow, measured, purposeful. I straightened immediately, heart racing. What are you doing? Evelyn's voice cut through the hallway like a blade sharpened on cold stone. I stepped back from the door. I thought I heard someone. You didn't. Her response was too quick, too firm. I know what I heard. Her expression hardened. You are imagining things. I stared at her, and for the first time, I didn't look away. Who's in that room? No one. Then open it. A muscle in her jaw twitched just once, but enough to answer every question I hadn't yet asked. No, she said softly, and you need to leave. Now. Her voice had dropped from polite to icy. Evelyn, I won't say it again. I stepped back, my pulse beating wildly in my neck. Everything in my body screamed that this wasn't just about the photos anymore. Something was wrong in this house. Something deeply, painfully wrong. I turned and walked toward the front door, every step echoing in the too quiet space. But just before I reached the exit, Evelyn spoke again, calm, composed, chilling. If you're going to marry my son, she said, you need to learn when to stop asking questions. I didn't reply, because deep down, I already knew I wouldn't be able to stop asking. Not now. Not after what I'd heard. Not after what I'd seen. And definitely not after what I would discover next. I don't remember the turns. I don't remember the stoplights. I don't even remember parking in front of Grandma's house. All I know is that I sat in the driver's seat long after the engine stopped, my hands still gripping the steering wheel as though letting go would make the whole day collapse around me. Someone had cried in that room. Someone who wasn't supposed to be there. Someone Evelyn wanted hidden. The thought seeped into me slowly, heavy, suffocating. I took a shaky breath and finally forced myself inside. The house was quiet, the familiar scent of lavender and warm dust wrapping around me like a blanket I suddenly didn't trust anymore. I sat on Grandma's old sofa and pressed my palms into my eyes until stars swam behind them. My mind kept returning to the locked door, the sob, the plea. Please, please just let me. I didn't tell Thomas, not yet. I couldn't. Because if he didn't believe me, if he turned it into a misunderstanding, if he defended his mother the way Evelyn said he would, I wasn't sure what that would do to me. Instead, I tried to steady myself. I made tea, I folded laundry. I swept the porch, even though it didn't need sweeping. Anything to distract my mind. But Grandma's voice, the memory of it kept creeping back. Secrets rot love from the inside. I didn't sleep that night, not really. Just drifted in and out of shallow rest until the sun rose pale and gray over the neighborhood rooftops. By morning, I'd made a decision. I would confront Thomas. Not with accusations. Not with anger, but with honesty, with clarity. He deserved that. We deserved that. The conversation that should have helped Thomas arrived at my house just after noon. He walked in smiling, but it faded fast when he saw my face. "Hey, what's wrong?" he asked, setting his keys on the counter. I motioned for him to sit. My hands were trembling slightly and he noticed. He touched my arm gently. "Babe, you're scaring me," I swallowed. "There's something I need to talk to you about. And I need you to listen without getting defensive." His brow furrowed. Okay, I took a breath that felt too shallow. "Why didn't you tell me your mom had photos of me?" He blinked. "Photos then? What photos?" I studied his face, his eyes, the way his confusion seemed real. "From months ago, maybe years. She keeps them in her bedroom, hidden." His mouth parted slightly, his expression tightening with disbelief. "Are you sure? I mean, my mom can be intense, but photos? That doesn't sound like her." I felt the sting of those words, the same sting Evelyn predicted. "She said a mother pays attention," I whispered. Thomas rubbed the back of his neck, sighing. "Look, I'm not saying you're lying, just that maybe you misunderstood. She probably kept the pictures from that charity event we went to. Remember? She took a ton." My chest tightened. "These weren't event photos, Thomas. They were stalker photos. Some taken without me knowing." His hesitation told me everything. Not that he knew, but that he didn't know what to do with what I was saying. He reached for my hand. "I'll talk to her. I promise, but she's under a lot of stress. The wedding, the finances, Dad's anniversary coming up. She's not herself lately." My stomach sank. "You're explaining it away." "No, I'm trying to make sense of it," he said, frustration flickering across his expression. "You're asking me to believe my mother is, what? Keeping surveillance on you?" "She is," I said firmly, but he pulled back slightly. "Not much, just enough to feel like a small fracture forming between us. And that's not all," I continued quietly. "There was someone in her house. Someone crying? Behind a locked door?" He exhaled sharp, disbelieving. "You went snooping?" "I heard someone in pain." He stood up, pacing a little. "My mom said you were on edge." I didn't want to believe her, but Thomas. He stopped. "I'm not imagining things." He rubbed his temples. "Then why wouldn't she tell me? Why would she hide something that intense?" "It doesn't make sense." "I don't know," I said. "But something is wrong in that house." We fell into silence. Finally, he sat down again, softer this time. "Okay." His voice dropped. "Tell you what, I'll go over there tonight. Alone. I'll ask her directly. And then tomorrow we'll figure this out together." I hesitated. "And the wedding?" He looked hurt. "You want to cancel it?" I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just let the question hang between us like thick smoke. Thomas's voice cracked a little when he spoke again. "I love you. I want to spend my life with you." I felt tears rise. "I love you too. But I can't walk into a family where there are secrets like this." He squeezed my hand with both of his. "I'll fix it." The desperation in his voice told me he meant it, and for a moment I believed him. The one message that changed everything he left around 6. I tried distracting myself again, cooking, pacing, even sorting old cards Grandma used to keep in her knitting basket. But when my phone buzzed, I jumped like I'd been shocked. It wasn't Thomas. It was from an unknown number, a single line. "You shouldn't have opened that door." At first, I froze. My fingers hovered over the screen as though touching it would burn me. The text didn't say who it was from. It didn't have to. I knew. "Evelyn." A chill spread through my entire body. Then a second message. "Some things are not meant for you." My breath hitched. A third message came in, slower this time, heavier. If you want this marriage to work, stop digging. I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Then something in me snapped, not in fear, but in clarity. This wasn't just a controlling mother-in-law. This wasn't just wedding stress. This was a woman hiding something. Something dangerous enough to threaten me over. I opened my contacts and clicked Thomas's name. But before I could call him, another message came through. Not from Evelyn this time. From Thomas. Hey babe, I'll be at mom's a little longer. Can we talk tomorrow morning? Love you. Nothing about my accusations. Nothing about the locked door. Nothing about the photos. Just normal. As if everything could be fixed with sleep. I stared at the message far longer than necessary. And deep inside, a cold realization formed. Thomas didn't understand what he was walking into. But I did, and tomorrow, I would discover the truth he never dared to see. Not even for a minute. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that hallway, that locked door, the shadow of a woman whose voice trembled behind it. And Evelyn's messages, cold, clipped, deliberate, sat on my phone like a bruise I kept pressing. Around dawn, I finally stood from the couch. My legs were stiff, and my chest felt tight. But something inside me had settled into a quiet resolve. I needed answers, not rumors, not half explanations, not guesses wrapped in politeness. Real answers. I made coffee, though I didn't drink it. I showered, put on fresh clothes, and tied my hair back like Grandma taught me, smooth, neat, out of my face so my mind could stay clear. By the time 8 o'clock rolled around, I had rehearsed my conversation with Thomas a dozen times. He'd walk through the door tired. He'd tell me whatever Evelyn told him last night, and I'd tell him I needed transparency before promises, before rings, before a wedding that required trust we didn't fully have. But when the knock came, it wasn't Thomas's. It was firmer, slower, measured. And the moment I opened the door, my heart sank. It was Evelyn. Her posture was perfect, her blouse crisp, her expression unreadable. She stood there like a woman who had rehearsed this moment, who had predicted every question before it even formed. "May I come in?" she asked. Not a request, a performance of one. I stepped aside, because refusing her felt like pouring gasoline on a lit match. She walked in calmly, glancing around the house, with eyes that didn't miss a thing. Grandma's rocking chair, the quilt on the sofa, the photographs along the mantel. "It looks the same," she murmured. My stomach twisted. "You've been here before?" "A long time ago," she said. "Before you knew Thomas." Something about the way she said that made my skin crawl. I crossed my arms. "Where's Thomas?" "At work," she replied simply. "I told him I'd speak with you myself." My heart thudded hard in my chest. "You told him?" Her eyes softened falsely. "He was upset last night, confused. I thought it best to speak mother to woman." "Mother?" I repeated, my voice tightening. "You and I aren't yet," she said calmly. "But you intend to be my daughter-in-law. And with that role comes responsibility." I stared at her, stunned by the audacity. What responsibility? To understand boundaries. Boundaries? I almost laughed. "Evelyn, you're the one spying on me." She didn't flinch. Not even a blink. Those cold, steady eyes remained locked on mine. "Did he tell you what I said last night?" "He didn't say much," I admitted. She offered a thin, controlled smile. "I imagine he didn't. Thomas has always struggled to confront the things that hurt him." Her tone softened in a way that felt practiced. "He has been through more than you realize." I waited because this felt like the moment she wanted me to lean in. When I didn't, she sighed, disappointed. "You heard someone in my house yesterday," she said. "And because of that, you've created ideas." "I didn't create anything," I replied. "I heard crying." She exhaled slowly, as if speaking to a stubborn child. "You misinterpreted." "Then explain it," I said. "Because until you do, nothing makes sense." Her gaze sharpened. "That is my private matter." A beat passed. Then another. Something cold swept through me, a clarity so sharp it nearly stung. "She's not a stranger, is she?" Evelyn's eyelids lowered just enough to reveal something beneath her composure, fear or rage or both. I took a step closer. "Tell me who she is." "You're overstepping," she whispered. "Someone is living in your house," I said. "Someone who isn't allowed to come out." "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I demanded. Her expression cracked just a hairline fracture. "But enough. You don't understand my family," she said quietly. "You don't know what we have endured." "Then tell me," I urged. "Help me understand." She looked away, her jaw tight. And for the first time since I'd met her, she seemed human, exhausted, burdened. I thought she might open up, but instead, she walked past me to the window, pulling the curtain slightly, scanning outside. "You shouldn't have gone near that room," she murmured. "Why?" I pushed. Her silence answered everything. "I'm not leaving Thomas over a misunderstanding," I said. "But I can't marry into a secret I don't understand." Evelyn turned, her eyes glistening not with tears, but with something more volatile. "You will ruin him if you push this." "No," I whispered. "The secrets will ruin us." Her breath caught, and just for a moment, real panic flashed through her. That's when I realized something. This wasn't about protecting Thomas from me. It was about protecting him from someone else. I took a slow step toward her. Evelyn, who was in that room. Her lips parted. She inhaled sharply, like a confession might spill out, but then a loud knock on the door startled us both. We both turned. 3 sharp knocks. Then Thomas's voice, urgent. "Babe, it's me. Open up." My heart surged. Before I could move, Evelyn grabbed my wrist. Hard. Hard enough that I winced. Her voice was low, almost shaken. "Do not tell him. Evelyn, you will destroy him," she whispered. "Please." It was the first time she had ever said please to me. But before I could respond, Thomas knocked again, louder this time. "Sweetheart, are you okay? Open the door." Evelyn released my wrist, stepping back, smoothing her blouse, as if nothing had happened. I walked to the door slowly, my pulse thundering. When I opened it, Thomas immediately pulled me into his arms. His warmth, his scent familiar and safe, nearly broke me. "I've been worried sick," he muttered into my hair. "Mom said you were upset this morning." Behind him, Evelyn stood still as stone. I looked at him, really looked, and I saw it. The stress in his shoulders, the exhaustion on his face, the loyalty he carried like a weight. He pulled back slightly. "Are you okay?" I opened my mouth. "Yes." "No, I don't know." Nothing fit. I glanced past him at Evelyn, rigid, watching, waiting. And then, at the corner of the living room window, I saw something. Movement. A figure standing near the edge of the yard. A young woman, pale, thin, watching us. She looked directly at me. Our eyes met. And then she disappeared behind the hedges, so quickly I questioned whether she had been there at all. But I knew she had, because her face, I had seen it before. In one of the photos taped inside the wardrobe. She was in them too. Standing behind me, watching me. The girl's face faded behind the hedge, but the imprint of it hollow cheek, tangled hair, eyes dark and desperate burned itself into my mind. I'd seen her before. Not in real life, not at Evelyn's house, but in a photo. One of the pictures taped behind the wardrobe, hidden behind the neat stacks of quilts and boxes of fine linen. She wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking at me, standing just far enough away to be unnoticed, unless you searched for her. My stomach dropped so sharply I felt dizzy. "Hey." Thomas squeezed my shoulder gently, drawing my attention back. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I swallowed hard. "Thomas, we need to talk." His shoulders sagged with relief. "Good, me too." He stepped inside, glancing briefly at his mother like he was bracing for conflict. Evelyn smoothed her blouse again, recomposing herself in seconds. "Can we sit?" he asked. I nodded, but my eyes flicked once more toward the window. The hedge rustled in the breeze, nothing more. But the silence felt too heavy, too deliberate. We sat on Grandma's sofa, Thomas beside me, Evelyn across the room in Grandma's stiff-backed rocking chair. She didn't rock. She didn't move at all. Thomas leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Mom told me you were worried about some pictures." My pulse spiked. "Thomas, and about a noise in the house." "Noise?" Evelyn repeated sharply, though she masked it with a cough. I ignored her. "I heard a woman crying," I said firmly, "and the room was locked." Thomas let out a slow breath, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I went to Mom's last night like I promised. I didn't see anything out of place. I felt a sharp sting of betrayal." "Did you ask her?" "I did," he insisted. "And she told me you misunderstood." I looked over at Evelyn. Her eyes were steady, unblinking, as if she'd rehearsed this denial for years. "She lies very easily," I said quietly. Evelyn flinched, but only a little. Thomas straightened defensively. "Hey." "No," I said gently, touching his arm. "I'm not trying to attack her. But I am asking for the truth." I turned back to Evelyn, who was crying in that room. Evelyn stood abruptly, and Thomas startled. "That is enough," she snapped. "You are not entitled to every corner of our life." "I'm marrying into it," I said. "I have a right to know the truth." Her voice dropped. You will not. Thomas looked between us, lost, unsure, exhausted. Mom, what's going on? She pressed her lips together tightly, then looked at him with a strange mixture of love and fear. Thomas, she whispered, some things aren't meant to be revisited. The moment she said it, I knew. The crying woman wasn't a stranger. She was family. Who is she? I asked, this time softer, steady. Who's in that room? Evelyn stared at me as if weighing the cost of every possible answer. Then she whispered, my daughter. Thomas's head snapped toward her. What? What are you talking about? Evelyn closed her eyes. You were too young to remember. I told you she died. The room spun. I felt the ground tilt beneath me as the weight of it settled. You told everyone. She died, she continued, her voice trembling for the first time. It was easier than the truth. Thomas shook his head. What truth? I didn't breathe. Couldn't breathe. She didn't die, Evelyn whispered. She broke. Years ago, after your father passed. She sat slowly, her hands shaking. She changed overnight, stopped eating, stopped talking. She wandered off once, and I found her miles away, barefoot in the rain. She became unstable. Her voice fractured on that word. Thomas froze, shock drawing every muscle in his face tight. You told me she drowned. I couldn't bear the looks, Evelyn said. The judgment. The pity. People treat you differently when they know your child is. She swallowed hard, deeply unwell. A terrible silence fell over the room. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Evelyn added, I kept her home. I kept her safe. I took care of her myself. It didn't make sense. Not fully, not yet. But pieces began shifting into place. The unseen presence, the locked door, the trembling voice, the hidden photos. Why the pictures? I asked. Evelyn's eyes fell to her lap. She fixated on you. My breath hitched. On me? She saw you once months ago when Thomas brought you to the park. She watched from the trees. She said you looked like someone she'd lost. Someone she still loved. She doesn't know me, I whispered. No, Evelyn said. But grief doesn't care about truth. She latched onto you. She talked to you as if you were, she hesitated, as if you were the person she wished she could go back for. I shook my head slowly, trying to understand. So she followed me? At first I didn't know, Evelyn admitted. She would disappear for hours. I found sketches of you in her room. Scrapbook pages with your name. She wasn't dangerous, but she was fragile. And when I realized she'd been wandering out onto the street, I started watching you to make sure she didn't approach you. I stared. So the photos aren't yours? No. Evelyn's voice cracked. They're hers. I pressed a hand to my mouth. The girl outside. The girl behind the door. The ghost-like figure trailing at the edges of my life. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, devastated. Why didn't you tell me? Because you grieve your father every day, Evelyn said. I couldn't let you grieve a sister too, not when she wasn't truly gone. But she is, Thomas whispered. Mom, she is. You just hid her behind a door. Evelyn broke then. Truly broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she covered her face with her hands. I didn't know what else to do. The room grew painfully quiet. And then, footsteps, soft, bare. Approaching the front porch, I turned toward the window. A shadow passed by. Then a gentle, trembling knock, tap, tap, tap. Thomas's breath caught. Evelyn gasped, and I felt the hair on my arms rise. Because the knock came with a whisper, fragile and familiar, please, please let me in. The knock wasn't loud. It wasn't forceful. It wasn't the banging of someone demanding entry. It was the knock of someone afraid they didn't deserve to be let in. 3 small taps. Tap, tap, tap. Thomas stood first, not out of bravery, but out of something heavier. Something closer to instinct. I should open it, he whispered, though his voice trembled. Evelyn reached for him. Thomas, he flinched away. You told me she was gone. She closed her eyes like the truth itself hurt to look at. Please don't do this right now. But the knocking came again. Softer this time. Almost like a question. I stepped toward the door before either of them could move. I don't know why. Maybe because something in that voice, the weak, breaking whisper, carried a loneliness I recognized deep in my bones. When I reached the door, Thomas stood beside me. Evelyn stayed back, hands clasped tightly as if she were praying for a different reality. I gripped the knob. Thomas swallowed hard. Slowly, I nodded when I cracked the door open. A gust of cool morning air swept in, and then I saw her. The girl from the hedge, the girl from the photos, The girl behind the locked door. She stood barefoot on the porch, her thin arms wrapped around herself, like she was holding something broken together. Her dark hair fell in tangled waves over her face, and her clothes hung too loose, too worn. Up close, she didn't look dangerous. She didn't look unstable. She looked lost. Her eyes lifted slowly to meet mine. Wide, wet, startled. When she spoke, her voice was barely a breath. "Are you her?" I cleared my throat softly. "Her who?" She blinked, confused not by my words, but by the fact that I didn't understand her question. Then her gaze drifted past me to Thomas, and everything in her face changed. She breathed his name, not loudly, not dramatically, just a whisper full of recognition and ache. Thomas. He froze, like the ground beneath him shifted, like history rearranged itself in front of him. "Lily?" He whispered, voice cracking. Her lips trembled. "You remember me?" Thomas took a step forward, then stopped, his voice tightening. I don't know. I don't. Mom said she said you." That was when Evelyn rushed forward. "Lily," she snapped, grabbing her daughter's arm with more force than I expected. "You can't leave the house without me. How did you get out?" Lily flinched, hard. Not the flinch of someone guilty, the flinch of someone afraid. Evelyn's grip was too tight, her voice too sharp, her panic too controlled. "Mom," Thomas's tone cut through the tension. "Stop." Evelyn recoiled slightly but didn't release her daughter's wrist. "She can't be out here. She isn't ready. She's a grown woman," I said softly. Evelyn's eyes snapped to me, burning with something fierce. "You don't know what you're talking about." But I did, because the way she held Lily firm, possessive, fearful was not the grasp of a protective mother. It was the grasp of someone who had built an entire world on control. Lily spoke suddenly, her voice distant and uncertain. "I just wanted to see her." "See who?" Thomas asked gently. She turned her eyes back to me. "You," she whispered. "The girl who looks like the one in my dreams." A shiver ran up my spine, not fear, but an understanding I didn't know how to explain. "What dreams?" I asked. Lily's fingers twitched to her sides. She looked down, struggling for words. "She's confused," Evelyn interjected, stepping forward, trying to pull Lily back toward the house. "She doesn't know what she's saying." But Lily jerked away, clumsy, stumbling, but determined. "No." Her voice rose, cracking. "You promised me I could talk to her." Evelyn's face drained of color. Thomas stared at his mother. "Mom, what promise?" Evelyn froze, caught. And Lily, shaking visibly, answered for her. She said if I behaved, I could see you before the wedding." "Me?" I echoed, shocked. Lily nodded slowly. Tears pooled at the corners of her eyes. Evelyn stepped forward as if to silence her, but Thomas blocked her path. "Mom, enough." His voice was quiet, controlled, dangerous. Evelyn's mouth opened, closed, opened again, searching for a defense she no longer had. Meanwhile, Lily looked at me with a kind of fragile hope. "I saw you in the pictures," she murmured. "I didn't take them at first. Mom did. She said you were safe." "My mother took those pictures," Thomas said, his voice cracking under disbelief. Evelyn's eyes darted between us. "I was protecting her? She wanders, she confuses people. You don't know what she isn't your prisoner," I said quietly. The words came out before I could soften them, but I didn't regret them. Because Lily's shoulders sagged with exhaustion. Because Thomas looked like someone who had just realized the ground under his feet was made of lies. And because Evelyn, she broke. Not with tears, but with the truth she'd been carrying like a stone in her chest. "She doesn't survive without me," she whispered. "You don't understand. She hurts herself when she's overwhelmed. She disappears. She gets lost. She forgets who she is. If people knew, they would take her away." Thomas stepped closer to his sister, voice gentle. "Lily, is that true? Do you feel unsafe?" Lily shook her head quickly. "No. I just feel alone." She glanced at Evelyn, then at the ground, then back at me. "I wanted to meet you before the wedding," she said softly. "You remind me of someone. Someone I miss." "Who?" I asked. She pressed her hand to her chest. "Myself." Something inside me cracked open. I don't know how long we stood like that, the four of us tangled in a truth none of us wanted, none of us were prepared for. But the silence was broken by the sound of tires crunching up the gravel driveway. A car, black, unmarked, it stopped right behind Thomas's vehicle. Two people stepped out, not police, not neighbors, They wore medical badges, mental health transport. Evelyn's breath caught. She whispered one trembling word, no. The two figures moved swiftly toward the porch. Their shoes scuffed the gravel, precise, clinical, like they had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. Evelyn's hands trembled at her sides. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She just stared, frozen, the weight of every secret she had carried pressing down on her. Thomas stepped forward, shielding Lily with a protective instinct I'd never seen so raw in him before. His hand gripped hers. "Lily," he said, voice soft but firm. "Look at me." She did, her eyes wide, brimming with fear, but she didn't move. The men in badges stopped a few feet from the door, papers in hand. One of them held a folder, flipping it open like he expected answers from the walls themselves. "Are you Lily?" he asked, voice calm, professional. She nodded hesitantly. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Evelyn. "You are her guardian." Evelyn's lips trembled. I've been caring for her. At home." His gaze was clinical, measuring. "Without proper documentation, mental health concerns have been reported." He looked at Lily. "We need to take her in for evaluation." Evelyn's face went pale. She reached out, instinctively, to pull Lily closer. "No, she doesn't need a hospital. She's safe with me." Thomas stepped in, firm but measured. "Mom, she's not your prisoner. She has a right to be heard, to be evaluated safely." Evelyn's eyes flared with panic. "You don't understand. She's fragile, she could harm herself. She could also heal," I said quietly. "Or she could have a life outside fear." Her gaze snapped to me, sharp and accusing. "And what would you know about raising her? About keeping her alive when she can't?" I swallowed. My voice shook slightly, but I pushed through. "I know what it's like to live in fear, to be trapped by someone else's choices. I won't let her be trapped anymore. Not now. Not ever." The man with the folder cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we can make this as smooth as possible. She'll be evaluated, given therapy, and we can coordinate with her family. No one is here to harm her." Lily's hand squeezed Thomas's. He looked at me, his jaw tight, eyes wide with a mixture of fear, sorrow, and disbelief. Evelyn sank slowly into the rocking chair, hands gripping the arms so tightly her knuckles were white. "I've done everything for her. She's mine." Thomas knelt down beside her, taking both her hands in his. "Mom, you've loved her, yes. But love isn't keeping her locked in a room. Love isn't hiding her from the world. It's letting her grow, letting her be safe, letting her decide who she wants to be." Her lips quivered. I didn't know what else to do, I know," he said softly. "But now we have to let her take the next step. Together." Lily's eyes flicked between Evelyn and Thomas. Then to me. She nodded slowly, trembling. She seemed to finally gather courage, inching forward. The man with the folder extended a hand gently. "Lily, we're here to help." "Can we go with you for now?" She hesitated. "For only a moment." Then, letting go of Evelyn, she took the offered hand. Evelyn sank back, silent, staring at the floor. Thomas turned to her. "Mom, I promise we'll be here. Every step. She won't be alone." Her lips pressed together, a long, quiet exhale escaping. I can't promise her that no one will judge me for this. You've done enough," I whispered. "Now, it's time to let her breathe." Lily looked back at Evelyn one last time before walking slowly toward the car, hand in hand with the professionals. Her eyes glistened, full of uncertainty but also a quiet spark of hope. I felt Thomas take my hand. He didn't speak, just held it. I rested my head against his shoulder, feeling the tension in his muscles slowly ease. "She's going to be okay," I whispered. "Really okay." He nodded, exhaling slowly. "I can't believe this. All this time," his voice trailed off. "All these years, Mom hid her. Hid the truth from me, from both of us." "I know," I said, "and now it's out. Now we know, and now we can decide what comes next. Together." Evelyn remained seated, silent, staring at the empty porch. The weight of the secret she had carried for decades pressed down on her shoulders. I realized something then. The betrayal wasn't just mine. It was Thomas's, hers, and Lily's too. They had all been living inside a story that wasn't fully told. Thomas finally let go of my hand and walked to his mother, kneeling in front of her. "Mom, I forgive you, but we have to change. All of us. It ends here." Evelyn's shoulders shook. I didn't hear a word, but her tears spoke volumes. For the first time in years, the tension in the room seemed to loosen. Not completely, healing never happens overnight, but a first crack of light had pierced decades of darkness. I moved to the window, looking at the hedge where Lily had disappeared earlier. It was empty now. The morning light fell softly on the grass, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt calm, because the truth had been revealed. Because no more lies could live in the shadows. Because Thomas, Lily, Evelyn, and I could finally start the slow, fragile journey toward healing. And somewhere deep inside, I knew the wedding might still happen, but it would only happen if we rebuilt trust, brick by brick, with honesty as the foundation. The days after that morning passed in a blur, but not the kind of blur you get from chaos or confusion. It was the blur of reality catching up with you, the slow, disorienting realization that a lifetime of secrets had been unpacked, and now nothing could go back to the way it was. Lily stayed with the professionals for evaluation, therapy, and careful monitoring. We were informed that she'd likely need ongoing care, but for the first time, there was a path forward that didn't include confinement or isolation. She was alive, she was safe, and she was free. Evelyn's world, on the other hand, had collapsed. Friends, neighbors, extended family, people she had told half-truths to for decades now saw the situation clearly. Whispers turned into questions, which turned into confrontations. At first, Evelyn recoiled. She shut herself inside the house, refusing to answer calls, declining visits. But slowly, she began to face the consequences of her choices. One afternoon, Thomas and I visited her with the gentle insistence that she needed to talk to her peers and family. "You can't hide forever," Thomas said quietly. "You need to face them. And you need to face Lily too. That's the only way to heal." Evelyn hesitated. She had always been so guarded, so carefully composed. But after a long silence, she nodded. A trembling gesture that betrayed every ounce of fear she had carried for decades. We went together to a small gathering of relatives who had been curious about Lily's absence for years. Some were shocked. Some were angry. Some quietly blamed Evelyn. But she spoke, and in that calm, shaky voice, she told the truth. She didn't defend herself. She didn't demand forgiveness. She simply told the story, the full story of her daughter's fragility, of the lies she had told to protect her, and of the mistakes she had made. The reaction was mixed, but overwhelmingly, people began to see her humanity. That doesn't erase the years of fear and secrecy, but it did create space for dialogue, for understanding, for slow mending of fractured relationships. Meanwhile, Thomas and I worked on our own healing. The wedding that had once been hanging in the balance over secrets and lies now became a conversation about trust and honesty. We postponed it not out of fear, but out of respect for the journey we were all on. Our friends, once unaware of the shadows that had haunted us, now rallied in support. They didn't judge, they listened, they encouraged. And as for Evelyn, she began therapy herself, slowly learning to release the guilt that had dominated her life. She apologized to Lily in letters first, then in short conversations when visits were allowed. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy, but the walls she had built were crumbling, and real, human connection was finally beginning to seep through the cracks. In our town, the story spread quietly. People were surprised not because of scandal, but because they hadn't realized the depth of human complexity that can hide behind polite smiles and neatly trimmed lawns. Neighbors began talking about the importance of looking beneath the surface, of checking in on one another, and of understanding that sometimes love can be both protective and suffocating. For Thomas and me, the public consequences were less about shame and more about awakening. We were forced to confront what it truly means to love someone, to be honest, to trust, and to hold each other accountable. And as the dust settled, as the whispers faded into background noise, the lesson became painfully clear. Secrets have a cost. And protecting someone by hiding the truth often causes more harm than the danger we imagine we are shielding them from. The family learned to talk openly, to confront fear instead of pretending it didn't exist. And in that painful transparency, we found a form of liberation that no one had anticipated. Even the small gestures mattered, the way Evelyn paused to check in with Lily over video calls, the way Thomas held my hand and whispered, "We'll be okay," or the way Lily slowly began to trust again, smiling at the world, as though it had finally become a place she could inhabit without fear. It wasn't perfection. Nothing in this story was perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like hope had room to grow. And in that time, we learned what patience really meant. Lily began attending therapy regularly, her progress slow but steady. She laughed sometimes softly, uncertainly, but it was real. There were moments when she would forget herself and retreat into silence, and we didn't punish her for it. We learned to sit with her, to offer calm presence instead of expectation. Thomas and I learned patience too, not just with Lily, but with each other. The wedding we had once imagined as a perfect, joyful celebration became less about ceremony and more about what it truly symbolized: a union built on honesty, trust, and the resilience of the human heart. Evelyn changed as well. Slowly, painstakingly, she began to understand the consequences of her actions and the ways fear had twisted love into something suffocating. Therapy, support groups, and candid conversations with family helped her release decades of guilt. She didn't become perfect. She never would. But she became human again, capable of seeing the world beyond the walls she had built around her daughter. The home that had once been a prison for secrets became a place of openness. I helped Lily set up her own small space in the house, a room with a window to the garden, full of soft blankets and sketches of things she loved. She would draw there for hours, and sometimes Thomas or I would sit nearby, quietly, offering presence instead of direction. We also learned the small, intimate power of gestures, a hand held too long, a meal prepared with care, the simple act of listening without judgment. These were the moments that began to stitch our fractured lives back together. One afternoon, I found myself sitting on the porch, the same one where Lily had first appeared. The sunlight warmed my face, and I could hear the distant sound of children playing down the street. Thomas joined me silently, sitting close but not touching, giving space and comfort at once. "She's gonna be okay," I said quietly, more to myself than to him. Thomas nodded. "And we will be too." I turned to him, meeting his gaze. "Do you think we could have gotten here without everything falling apart first?" He exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "No, it had to break before it could heal. That's the only way to build something that lasts." I smiled softly. I hope Grandma would have understood. Thomas squeezed my hand gently. She would. She always wanted us to see the truth, even if it hurt. In that moment, I realized what the real lesson had been all along. Love isn't about hiding the pain. It's about facing it together, patiently and honestly, even when it's terrifying, even when it seems impossible. We still had moments of fear, moments of doubt. Healing isn't linear and it's never perfect, but each day we chose transparency, compassion, and understanding. Each day we learned to forgive, not for the sake of others, but for the sake of our own hearts. Evelyn, slowly, began joining us for family dinners. The conversations were sometimes awkward, sometimes tearful, but they were real, and for the first time, I could see her humanity, the mother, flawed and fragile, trying to make amends in her own way. Lily smiled more each week, sometimes at me, sometimes at Thomas, sometimes at the garden birds or the sunlight spilling across the lawn. She wasn't healed, not fully. But she was alive, and she was free. Thomas and I eventually set a new date for our wedding, not because we had to, but because we wanted to, with open hearts and eyes wide open to the responsibility of trust. And I knew that when I walked down that aisle, I wouldn't just be committing to Thomas. I'd be committing to honesty, to courage, and to the promise that no secret, no fear, no shadow would ever be allowed to govern our lives again. Sitting on that porch one evening, with the sky streaked pink and gold, I felt my grandmother's presence, not in a ghostly way, but in the quiet insistence of her wisdom. Always listen. Always watch. Always trust your heart. I had listened. I had watched. And I had trusted my heart. And now we were moving forward. Step by step. Day by day. I tell you this story not for shock, not for drama, but because life, sometimes, hides its lessons in the shadows, and sometimes the hardest truths are the ones we must face to live fully. Secrets may protect in the short term, but honesty heals in the long term. Love is never perfect, but love built on transparency, courage, and compassion lasts far longer than fear ever could. Would you have had the courage to confront the truth, even when it threatened everything you thought you knew? Would you have chosen honesty over comfort, even when it was terrifying? Life will test us in ways we cannot imagine. But when we face it with open hearts, when we trust ourselves and those we love, the world begins to make sense again. And in that sense, there's hope. If this story moved you, if it made you pause and reflect on the relationship in your own life, consider sharing it with someone you love. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that reveal the hidden truths of the heart, the family, and the fragile, beautiful complexity of being human. Because sometimes, the most important lessons come not from what we are told, but from what we have the courage to discover ourselves.